Mr. Whittingdale, thanks a lot for being with us. We are welcome back to Ukraine and to our Hromadske studio. You know, like today, Ukrainians are looking at London after Brexit, at the United Kingdom, with some kind of a disappointment, because for Ukraine, the European Union is something we are looking for as a model, with all these troubles and difficulties, but the process which we see in Europe with some kind of a disintegration of European Union doesn't look healthy for this part of the world. It's like then we have a Europe in turbulence. It's kind of go against the Ukrainian idea to reform itself, to work according to the European rules. And you were the one who were supporting Brexit, though there are a lot of critics for this. How would you explain it, being both, you know, here and doing something which is rather taking the United Kingdom away from Brussels, where Ukraine is leaning?
Well, I have always wanted to see a Europe which was broader, including more countries, but less integrated, less centralized in Brussels. The reason that Britain became steadily more unhappy with our relation with the European Union was that it became more and more a political project. It was integration with more power being given to Brussels. And so we felt that we had less and less control over our own policies. That was particularly in the case of immigration, which was a huge issue in the referendum, but the general position that our laws were being overruled often by Brussels, which was distant from the British people. And so there was a very strong view that we wanted to regain the right of self-government.
And are you satisfied with the result?
I'm very happy with the outcome of the referendum, which is what I campaigned for, which is a very clear mandate to the British government that we will leave the European Union and look for a new arrangement. But we are now entering a period during which we are going to have to work out that new arrangement, and it will take time.
But how it goes together, like any kind of communication with post-Soviet countries, Eastern European countries, where you have the feeling of the isolation of the United Kingdom and people busy with the domestic, not international stuff.
Well,
we don't see how it goes together.
Well, you're right that this is going to be a challenge for the British government, which is going to take time. But that is not to say that we will not still be a very strong voice internationally. One of the reasons why I supported Britain leaving the European Union was because it actually allows Britain to forge stronger relationships with countries beyond the borders of the European Union. At the moment, if you're in the EU, for instance, you're not allowed to reach a bilateral trade agreement with another country. We couldn't have a trade agreement with America or Canada or China because it has to be done through the EU, even though the EU's record at doing so is terrible. So we now see this as a chance to strengthen our relationship with countries around the world. And I would still argue very strongly that we must be a very powerful voice in such areas as the current challenges in Eastern Europe and post-Soviet countries. And of course, we are still going to be the second biggest contributor to NATO. We're a member of the G7, so there is no question Britain will still be a very strong voice.
But what we feel with any communication with London, you talk to diplomats, experts, people in Brussels, people outside of the UK, and some of the very strong voices inside, that today London, Whitehall, Downing Street are busy with the local issues, which means the issues of, you know, the Ukrainian support to Ukraine, the kind of the unity over the sanctions against Russia, where the unity of the Western allies of Ukraine is very important. You kind of see that the Brexit pushed this unity away, and there is some kind of issues between London and between Brussels. So instead, something this region needed, especially within the context of the annexation of Crimea, of the Kremlin influence, instead of the strong unity of the European Union, you see that one strong member is just busy and preoccupied with own domestic things.
Well, I don't think that's true. Yes, we have an awful lot of work to do to reach a new arrangement with the European Union. I sit on the parliamentary committee now, which oversees that, but that doesn't mean we don't wish to continue to play a strong role in the challenges which face all countries. Now, the fact that our new Foreign Secretary, after the referendum, chose as one of the very first countries to visit it was Ukraine. And he has also spoken out very strongly, as have other members of British government, in condemning Russian activity, both against Britain as well as in Ukraine, shows that we remain a very strong supporter of Ukraine, and we intend to continue to punch our weight and more in the international arena.
And your previous position, you've been the Minister for Culture, Media and Sport. And especially today, a lot of people are speaking about the disinformation, about the propaganda, the people being confused, not trusting the media. And the counterpart for what we have the strong public service, which should be strengthened. While at your position, you were really critical, sometimes often to BBC. You wanted that the board is chosen in a different way, which could endanger the independence. There were ideas about some cuts. Do you feel, what is your responsibility and role in these debates that we ended up in the climate where people, where such a role model like a BBC is kind of challenged and criticized, while the strength of such public service, good journalism organization is incredibly valuable?
Well, you talk about disinformation, and in actual fact, a lot of the stories which were written about what we were trying to do to the BBC were completely wrong. I think the BBC is one of the finest broadcasters, if not the finest broadcaster in the world. I wanted to strengthen it, and we have now agreed a new charter for the BBC to take it forward in the next 10 years, which the BBC have strongly welcomed. So I think we got a good outcome. Now, beyond that, there is the separate part of the BBC, which is the World Service. That is the international voice of the BBC. I argued very strongly that against the increase in propaganda which we were seeing from Russia and indeed elsewhere, the need for that strong independent voice which the BBC provides was even greater. And so we actually agreed to a significant increase in the BBC World Service budget, and a part of that will be to improve the service in the Russian language and to counter the misinformation that is being put around.
What increase you mean? How much? How big is that increase?
Well, it's a tens of millions of pounds, but it's to spread across a number of different services. It's up to the BBC exactly how they use it, but the government has made very plain that the Russian service is one of the areas we want to see the BBC provide more, and that is now being done by the BBC. But the BBC is independent, so we provide money to the BBC, but we don't try and tell them how to do things, because that would undermine their independence, and that is the last thing I want to do.
How would you explain that if you really talk to the BBC journalists and the others, you say that your position were more tougher, that there would be more government control over, over introducing, in particularly the way the board is?
Well, what I would say first of all is the old governance structure of the BBC didn't work. There were a number of significant problems which emerged in the course of the last few years, where the BBC either wasted vast amounts of money, or actually there were editorial failures. We wanted a clearer structure. I asked somebody to produce an independent report recommending a new structure of governance, which was a single board of the BBC. That was agreed by everybody as being a better structure. That is what we're now putting in place. We then had a discussion as to who should appoint the members of the board. Under the old system, every single member of what was called the trust, which ran the BBC, was appointed by the government. Under the new system, actually a majority of the new board members will not be appointed by the government. So it is significantly more independent than the old structure.
So what the United Kingdom proposed to Ukraine after Brexit, after its...
Well, one of the reasons for my coming was firstly to reassure people in Ukraine on the questions you have quite rightly asked me about whether or not it means we are not going to be able to take an active role in Ukraine because we're too bound up with our own concerns, and I've made it clear that that is certainly not the case, but also to get across that Brexit in some ways will allow us to reach stronger relations with individual countries where we have historic ties or where we see opportunities, and certainly I would like to see a very clear trade agreement with Ukraine, but also strengthen political cooperation. And in all my visits to Ukraine, and I've made many over the last 5-6 years, it is about how Britain can help Ukraine become a stronger, independent, democratic society.
So in particular, today, who has initiated your visit? You're currently not a minister, you're a member of parliament. But
to be honest, I have initiated it. As a member of parliament, we actually have a little pot of money that's available to MPs in order that we can go and visit capitals of Europe to talk to fellow politicians in those capitals. And Ukraine comes within that. And so I was able to ask parliament whether they would support my visit today, and I'm hoping to come back probably in the new year and bring some of my colleagues on a follow-up visit.
And in particular, whom you would like to meet, and like if you have the short-term aim, so is it just reassuring that after Brexit?
No, it is a matter of reassuring people that the United Kingdom remains a very strong supporter of Ukraine, and we're not going anywhere, even though we may no longer be in the European Union. But I've also always taken an interest in trying to support Ukraine in meeting the challenges of becoming more transparent, more democratic, introducing a stronger independent judiciary, and obviously tackling corruption, which remains a big problem in this country. And I know there are a group of my colleagues who want to do the same. And whilst I've been here only for 48 hours, I've tried to listen to voices from right across the political spectrum. And that's always been my approach, to listen to all the different views as to how to take Ukraine forward.
Mr. Whittingdale, within the last years, of course, the Ukrainian journalists are looking closely to the Ukrainian oligarchs, because that's a part what you've just mentioned, the fight of the corruption. So always we know that you, the part of the Ukrainian British society, you were active in some things. So for instance, and there is a lot of information online. So for instance, the Atlantic Council, they issued this report, the Kremlin Trojan Horses, and we do have your name here with your connection to Mr. Firtash, a Ukrainian oligarch. It's a kind of a serious think tank. It's not the defamation bulletin. It's a very important paper.
It is very badly researched, if I may say.
But
because one of the things I would say is that I have probably been more critical in my public comments about Russian invasion and occupation of parts of Ukraine than almost any other British member of parliament. I initiated debates on Ukraine during the Maidan, in the post-Maidan, during the annexation of Crimea, and I've always made clear my utter condemnation of Russian involvement. And so I've sought to be a voice in favour of Ukraine. Now, I was before I joined the government, supported in a couple of my visits by the British Ukrainian Society, who allowed me, by arranging, for instance, my attendance at the Yalta European Strategy Conference. It was there that I first met Mr. Poroshenko, Mr. Yatsenyuk, Vitaly Klitschko. I probably couldn't have made those trips if I hadn't had that support. At no point did Mr. Firtash ever try and influence my opinion. He never paid me money, but the British Ukrainian Society did help me make those trips, and I learned an awful lot about your country as a result.
So I would like really to clarify, since we have this chance to talk. So it's clearly written that the organization sounds like a bilateral relations grouping, but is a front of the Firtash personal PR effort, and there is a name of Lord Risby, and there is your name. So what is in particular, if you have this chance to clarify, what is your relations with Mr. Firtash?
Well,
how often do you communicate?
I don't. I mean, when I was supported by the British Ukrainian Society before I became a member of the British government. When I became a member of the British government, I had to give up all my involvement in outside organisations and all external interests. Quite rightly, that is part of the rules of becoming a minister. So I resigned from any involvement with the British Ukrainian Society, as I did from various other groups, including, sadly for me, the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine. And I have had no contact since then. I am now able to resume my interest in Ukraine because I'm no longer a member of the government, but I'm acting independently now.
So in that way, for instance, this trip is paid by?
As I explained to you, this trip is paid for by the British Parliament. There is a facility to allow MPs to visit other parliaments in Europe, and happily I've been able to take advantage of that, and I hope to be able to in the future.
How do you think then, today the oligarchy in Ukraine is an issue still, and this high-level corruption, and the part of it is also that the Ukrainian oligarchs have the chance to whitewash their money in London, you know, buy properties, to have an accounts on the different islands and offshores. And a lot would say, the British journalists would say, that it's up to British parliamentaries to really do something with that the Russian and the Ukrainian oligarchs wouldn't be able so. So having these relations, what would you think what you could do and what you are going to do with that?
Well, I would say that the British government has done quite a lot already to try and prevent illegal activity and money laundering and dirty money passing through London. We've tightened the rules considerably in terms of transparency. But of course, the other thing which is very strong in the United Kingdom, which I hope Ukraine will move towards as well, is a legal process that is independent and protects citizens' rights. Therefore, if it is shown that money has been obtained illegally, then it is absolutely right that should be confiscated and we should have no involvement. But there is a legal process. Parliament can't just declare that somebody is no longer able to access money in the city unless we can demonstrate that there is evidence and it is upheld by a court of law. So we have to proceed within the legal process.
Yeah, so but that is so. What would be the, you know, like, so it sounds a bit like the thing that there is a limit what the parliament can do. Of course, there is a legal system for that, but let's be creative. It really strikes hard back if, you know, if the country like Ukraine want to look West as a model of not being corrupt, and they see that and it's not just about Ukraine, it's about Egypt, it's about Middle East, it's about Russia, that we have our oligarchs finding the asylum just because they have money. It's very discouraging. So how would you think, what are also the political way to because there are different kind of things, you know, the parliament still can introduce some other things in the legal system.
Well, I think there are two parts to this. There is the action that needs to be taken in Ukraine, which is an anti-corruption agenda to have greater transparency, and I know great progress has already been made in introducing more transparency into the system, and you need to have, alongside that, a strong independent judicial system. Once that is in place, and we will be keen to assist with that process, you know, we will respect the laws of Ukraine, and obviously we will not wish to see people who are pursued in Ukraine being able to hide money in London. And that is something which is not about Ukraine. It is a general rule which we would wish to apply across the globe. The British government has done a great deal to try and make global money laundering more difficult, to try and identify where funds are from, making sure that people pay their taxes as they should, and also that money is not stowed away illegally, and opening up some of the sort of havens around the world. And that is something which my government led on when I was a part of it.
You said the part of of your visit, it also the issue is that the UK can have these trade agreements with Ukraine. Can we be more specific on that? So what would be your business, or like you think this kind of interest for the trade companies and for the business in Ukraine in these circumstances?
Well, I mean, we will be looking to have strong trade agreements right around the world. Now, Ukraine is still a relatively small market compared to some of the others, but there is great potential here. There's also links between Britain and the Ukraine, and a bilateral trade agreement is about removing tariff and non-tariff barriers, making it easier for businesses in each country to trade with each other, and to have clear rules and opportunities identified in which they can do so. That is a discussion which would take place between, obviously, trade representatives from Britain and with Ukraine, and we would hope to reach an agreement of that kind.
And in that case, you are the part of the you are the member of a parliament and there is a government. There is a different branches of power, but in that sake, there is a foreign office, but this kind of, how do you see the position of the Foreign Office? Of course, you said that Boris Johnson had been here, but there was no other reasons to believe that the Boris Johnson is, and the current Foreign Office is somebody really interested in, having Eastern Europe being more integrated into the, common market. It's still a bit of the isolationist position.
Well, we have provided a lot of support, and I hope we're going to continue to do so in terms of supporting democratic institutions in Ukraine and better governance structures. Now, we also pressed for Ukraine to have access to the European market, and as I said, we actually want to have an arrangement with Europe where we have that access too for exports. We actually buy more from Europe than we sell to Europe, so it's in Europe's interests that we still have that open markets. There were particular reasons which were to do with sovereignty and the reluctance to go on accepting that Brussels could overrule the British Parliament. That was why we decided that it was no longer in interest to remain a member of the European Union. But I think the European Union as a whole has to change. Britain is not alone in expressing these concerns. And every time there has been a vote in a different country in Europe, you have seen an expression by people that they feel Europe is somehow going in the wrong direction.
But aren't you concerned about the kind of a growing populism, which also plays a lot with the nationalism, with some kind of the anti-immigration and even anti-tolerance sentiment?
Well, it depends what
which
you mean
some
by
of the right-wing forces support, from Moscow to France.
The most dangerous thing you can do is to repress and ignore the public opinion. If people feel that government is no longer listening to them, is not taking account of their concerns, that is what leads to extremism. What we did was say to the British people, we know that you have serious concerns about the membership of the European Union, and we agreed to give them the opportunity to decide whether or not to stay. We had a very robust campaign. It went on for a long time. It became very passionate, but the result was very clear.
But were there the factual mistakes in the campaign when, for instance, the issue with the names of the national healthcare system, which even Mr. Farage admitted that
well, Mr. Farage had nothing to do with the campaign.
No, but I mean, like the some kind of protagonist of Brexit vote admitted later that some of the information they were campaigning wasn't correct.
Well, I would say that the most misleading information which was put out in the campaign was the forecasts by those who said that if we chose to leave, then we would instantly have a recession, that unemployment would go up, that the house market would collapse. There were gloomy forecasts, none of which proved to be true. Britain is still going to grow faster than any other country in Europe. In the coming year, we are a strong economy and we will trade very successfully outside. So I think that the forecasts which were made, the warnings which were delivered during the campaign have proven to be untrue. And I still think that if you took a vote in Britain today, you would get the same outcome.
What would you say to those who say that the Brexit and the Trump and this kind of the position of, as I already put it, like a bit of the isolationism, a bit of the, disintegrating the existing institution in very volatile period where we have Russian aggression, some kind of a breach of the international law, works in favor of the Kremlin? Well,
I would not put those two different elections in the same category. The British vote in favour of leaving the European was an expression of a wish to regain the right of self-government of the United Kingdom, something that I would imagine people in Ukraine would sympathise. We no longer wanted to be told what to do by a bloc which we felt wasn't properly accountable to the British people. It was a clear expression that we feel we can do better outside. Now, the result in America has created all sorts of uncertainties. We still don't know whether the American administration is going to be more sympathetic to Russia or more hostile. All of these have created concerns, and we will be seeking to put the case to President Trump and his team that Russian aggression in Ukraine must still be opposed, and we must stand up against Russia. So I don't think the two are the same.
We represent an independent media. We don't represent the government, and we know all the troubles Ukraine has with the corruption, with the time the reforms are taking place. But at this time, there is a bit of sometimes a frustration. We hear about the Ukrainian fatigue, but at the same time, the Ukrainians also would like to be very to have something clear, to which support Ukraine can expect from the West. In that case, from London in particular.
Well, I mean, I think we will continue to look at areas where we can help, where we can provide advice, where we can provide financial support. There are certain elements which Britain is very strong, where I know we would be keen to provide assistance to Ukraine, and that has been the case in the last few years.
And that's exactly...
Well, it'll be areas like, for instance, Britain has perhaps a longer history of individual rights and the independence of a legal system than almost any other country in Europe. We have just celebrated the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, which laid down the rights of the citizen to a fair trial. Now, that is an area where we can help Ukraine develop those same safeguards for the citizen.
Is there any plan? You're speaking about something in particular, or like potential areas, or there is anything?
No, I mean,
it's already 3 years we have in this situation.
And there is a lot of work being done. We have obviously already. I mean, I've taken part in a number of initiatives to talk to members of the Rada about how to make the Parliament of Ukraine work better. Now, one of the debates I've had, which I know is very relevant at the moment, is whether MPs should have immunity. Now, actually, in Britain, MPs have no immunity at all, and I think that is right. But at the same time, we have a strong, independent legal system that cannot be influenced by the government, and that is an important component too. So it is moving towards that kind of society where I think we can help Ukraine.
Okay, thanks. That's interesting. And thanks for answering the question. Our audience is concerned because we're here for our audience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.